I want you to imagine a night when your mind feels louder than the world around you. The kind of night where the silence becomes a mirror, showing everything you've tried to hide from yourself. That was the night he sat alone, staring at the wall, repeating words he didn't believe anymore. Affirmations, visualizations, forced gratitude. He whispered them like someone begging a locked door to open. But nothing moved, nothing changed, nothing responded. His heart felt numb, distant, unreachable. And that's when he realized the truth he had been avoiding. He didn't know how to feel what he wanted. No matter how hard he tried, the feeling wouldn't come. And deep inside, he feared that maybe he was one of those people who simply couldn't manifest anything, no matter what he did. The air felt heavy around him, as if the universe itself was listening to his collapse. That was the moment his life began to tilt into a quiet, dark spiral. He had followed every step the self-help world teaches. He wrote his goals in a notebook, exactly 25 times every morning. He created vision boards with glossy images of success, wealth, love, and freedom. He repeated affirmations until his throat burned. He tried to visualize the future so vividly that it would force itself into reality. But every attempt left him feeling emptier, more disconnected, more convinced that something inside him was broken. He watched other people talk about manifesting money effortlessly, about attracting opportunities, about feeling abundance as if it were already theirs. And every time he heard them say it, his stomach twisted with a bitterness he hated. Why could they feel it so easily while he remained numb? Why did the techniques that transformed other lives only make him spiral deeper into self-doubt? He tried to pretend he believed. Sometimes he even managed to smile, forcing positivity into places where it didn't belong. But inside, something felt wrong. Every time he looked at his vision board, he felt the same cold emptiness in his chest. It wasn't resistance. It wasn't limiting beliefs. It was something deeper, something he couldn't name, an emotional paralysis that made it impossible to embody the feeling of having what he wanted. He wasn't visualizing the future. He was mourning the future he couldn't feel. And that was the beginning of the real darkness. He started waking up every day with a subtle ache behind his eyes, a heaviness that made even the simplest tasks feel like walking through water. He began comparing himself to everyone around him, convinced they all had access to some emotional dimension he couldn't enter. His work felt meaningless. His relationships felt flat. His own reflection began to look like someone he didn't recognize. He felt like a failure, not because life wasn't giving him what he wanted, but because he couldn't feel what he needed to feel to make life respond. He didn't know it yet, but this was the exact condition Wallace D. Wattles described as the prison of the competitive mind, the state where your entire existence becomes a reaction to circumstances instead of a creation of your own consciousness. Wattles said the competitive mind is the mind that begs, chases, doubts, and fears. It is the mind that lives by the evidence of the senses instead of the certainty of the source. And that was the mind he was trapped in, lonely, anxious, panicked, desperately trying to manifest from a place of emotional scarcity. One evening, while trying once again to force himself into the feeling of abundance, he finally broke down. He sat on the edge of his bed, hands shaking, breathing unevenly. He said out loud, "Why can't I feel it? Why is it so easy for everyone else but impossible for me?" His voice cracked into the darkness. For a moment, the room felt painfully silent, as if the universe itself had paused to listen. And then he whispered something like a confession. "Maybe I'm the problem." The moment he said those words, his entire chest tightened, and something inside him collapsed. He felt like he had spoken a curse over his own life, a curse that had been growing for years. He didn't know how to undo it. He didn't know if he even could. He tried one more time to visualize, closing his eyes, imagining the future he wanted, trying to picture himself living the life he had been begging for. But the emptiness returned. It always returned, a cold, numb sensation in his chest, like trying to start a fire with wet matches. Nothing ignited, nothing warmed, nothing felt real. He opened his eyes and stared at the floor, feeling defeated. He didn't know it yet, but he was at the exact point where transformation actually begins. Not when a person feels powerful, but when they feel completely powerless. Not when they think they know what to do, but when they finally admit they don't. That night, he did something strange. He pulled out an old box from his closet, one he hadn't opened in years. Inside, beneath a pile of forgotten notebooks and dusty papers, he found a thin, weathered book with a brown cover. He didn't remember buying it. He didn't remember reading it. But there it was, The Science of Getting Rich by Wallace D. Wattles. The title felt almost mocking given the state he was in. But something in him told him to open it anyway. When he flipped through the pages, he noticed something immediately. The words weren't motivational, they weren't poetic. They weren't designed to make him feel good. They were direct, sharp, almost surgical. And one sentence struck him so deeply that he stopped breathing for a moment. You do not have to get rich. You only have to become rich. He read it again slowly. You do not have to get rich. You only have to become rich. Something in that line grabbed him, as if someone had just pulled a wire straight out of the numb part of his chest. Wattles wasn't talking about chasing success. He wasn't talking about begging the universe. He wasn't talking about hoping or wishing. He was talking about something else, something internal, something foundational, something the protagonist had completely ignored. Wattles talked about the feeling of being in possession internally before it exists externally, not hoping, not wanting, not forcing emotion, but entering the mental and emotional state of already having. That was the difference. That was what separated the creative mind from the competitive mind, and that was exactly what he had never been able to do. As he read, he began to see flashes of insight he had missed all his life. Feelings don't come from trying. They come from being. They don't come from repetition. They come from alignment. They don't come from desperation. They come from identity. And suddenly, everything he had been doing, the affirmations, the visualization techniques, the forced gratitude, felt like a performance, a ritual of pretending instead of embodying. He wasn't trying to feel abundance. He was trying to escape lack. He kept reading, and the deeper he went, the more he realized something terrifying and liberating. The universe had never responded to his words. It had always been responding to his state, his emotions, his identity, his energetic posture. He had been broadcasting the vibration of, I do not have, while trying to think, I will have. But the universe doesn't listen to words. It listens to the emotional truth behind them. And that realization hit him harder than anything he had felt in years. For the first time, he understood the root of his numbness. He wasn't emotionally broken. He was emotionally out of alignment. He wasn't failing to manifest. He was manifesting exactly what he felt, and what he felt was lack, emptiness, scarcity, and self-doubt. That night, with the old book open in his hands, he whispered something into the darkness. Then teach me how to feel it. The room felt still, heavy, charged with something he hadn't felt before. A strange calmness washed over him, a subtle shift inside his chest, fragile but undeniable. Something was happening. Something was waking up. He didn't understand it yet, but he would. And that night became the beginning of the journey that would change him forever. He didn't sleep that night, not because of anxiety, but because something inside him felt like it had finally shifted for the first time in years. It wasn't a breakthrough. It wasn't enlightenment. It was something much quieter, much more subtle, like the faint warmth of a candle in a cold room, something he didn't want to lose by closing his eyes. As the hours passed, he kept the book open beside him, rereading the same paragraphs over and over, letting the words sink into places that had never been touched before. Wallace D. Wattles wasn't telling him to fake confidence, or pretend to be successful, or force emotions he didn't feel. He was saying something profoundly different, that the universe responds to a person's internal state, not their external effort. And without even noticing it, he began confronting a truth he had spent years avoiding. His internal state was built on fear. He feared not being enough. He feared being left behind. He feared that the world favored everyone but him. He feared that maybe he was incapable of feeling abundance. And because fear had become the foundation of his emotional world, every technique he tried had been built on unstable ground. You can't build the feeling of abundance on top of the fear of not having. You can't build gratitude on top of panic. You can't build certainty on top of doubt. Wattles said the creative mind cannot operate in fear, and for the first time, the protagonist understood why. Around 4 in the morning, he closed the book and sat in silence, letting the weight of that realization press against his chest. It felt like confronting a shadow version of himself, one he had ignored, avoided, or numbed for years. The shadow didn't disappear just because he understood it. In fact, now that he finally acknowledged its existence, it felt even more vivid, more present. But instead of collapsing under it, he let himself observe it. Wattles wrote that observation without resistance is one of the first steps into the creative mind. And so he observed. He noticed how his breath changed when he thought about money. He noticed the tension in his stomach when he imagined his future. He noticed the heaviness in his chest when he tried to feel gratitude. He noticed the small flickers of anger when he saw other people succeed. He noticed the guilt that came immediately after the anger. And underneath everything, there was one vibration he had never named: shame. Shame for not being who he thought he should be. Shame for not manifesting what everyone else seemed to manifest effortlessly. Shame for feeling behind. Shame for feeling empty. Shame for failing to feel. The darkness inside him wasn't resistance, it was shame, and shame has only one cure: truth. As the sun began to rise, a faint blue light entered the room. He hadn't moved for an hour. He simply sat with the awareness that everything he had ever tried to do was built on emotional dishonesty. Not intentional, but unconscious. He had been trying to force himself into a feeling of abundance without ever healing the emotional wounds that kept him anchored in scarcity. Wattles said the creative mind is the mind that assumes, not hopes. It knows, it does not beg. It embodies, it does not chase. And that was the missing piece. He had been trying to run toward the future instead of becoming it. Later that morning, he walked outside for the first time in days. The world looked the same: cars, sidewalks, people rushing to work. But something felt slightly different inside him. Not a miracle, not transformation, but a subtle shift. He didn't feel abundance yet. He didn't feel prosperity. But he felt a strange kind of awareness, like someone had turned on a light in a very dark hallway inside his mind. It was dim, but enough to see the first step. That day he made a decision. He wouldn't force any feelings anymore. He wouldn't try to trick the universe. He wouldn't pretend he felt abundant when he didn't. He wouldn't lie to himself emotionally. Instead, he would learn to align with the feelings slowly, gently, honestly. If he couldn't feel abundance yet, he would feel calm. If he couldn't feel calm, he would feel neutral. If he couldn't feel neutral, he would feel breathing. And that breathing would become the bridge to everything else. For the first time, he understood that feeling is not intensity. Feeling is alignment. That night, he sat down again, not with desperation, not with fear, but with curiosity. He opened the book one more time, and one sentence stood out as if it had been waiting for him. Hold the vision with faith and purpose, and feel grateful before you receive. This time, the words didn't trigger guilt. They triggered clarity. Gratitude before receiving wasn't a command. It was a strategy to enter the creative world. Gratitude wasn't pretending. Gratitude was alignment. He closed his eyes and tried something new, not visualizing wealth, not imagining success, not repeating affirmations. He simply imagined what it would feel like to be someone who truly believed the universe was friendly, someone who didn't rush, someone who didn't fear, someone who knew that what was coming was already his. He didn't try to force emotion. He tried to feel the identity behind the emotion. At first, nothing happened, only silence. But then, slowly, a soft warmth appeared in his chest. A small shift, like the first degree of difference between cold and warm. Not enough to call abundance, not enough to call manifestation, but enough to call change. Enough to know he was touching something real, something he had never accessed before. That night, he whispered again, but this time not in desperation. Teach me how to feel it. And the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt responsive. He didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of the rebirth of his emotional world. Over the next few days, something inside him began to shift. Not dramatically, not like a spiritual awakening with fireworks and revelations. It was quieter, almost imperceptible, like a dark room gradually filling with light from beneath a door. He didn't force gratitude anymore. He didn't try to scream affirmations over his doubts. He didn't pretend prosperity. Instead, he focused on something much simpler, something Wattles insisted on. Entering the creative mind by assuming the feeling of certainty, not the feeling of intensity. Every morning he sat in silence for a few minutes, not to visualize a mansion or a luxury car or a pile of money, but to practice the smallest emotional shift possible, from fear to neutrality, from neutrality to calm, from calm to quiet confidence. At first he struggled. The old patterns pulled him back toward doubt. Thoughts like, "It's not working," or "Nothing is changing," tried to take over. But every time they did, he gently redirected himself, remembering one of Wattles's most important teachings. You must think truth regardless of appearances. That line became a rope he held onto, because the appearances of his life didn't change immediately. The bank account didn't grow overnight. Opportunities didn't fall from the sky. People didn't suddenly praise him or support him. Nothing external shifted. But internally, something was growing. A seed. A quiet pulse of faith. Not blind belief, but something cleaner, lighter, almost rational. He noticed that as he began to feel a little better emotionally, his thoughts changed. They became clearer, less frantic. He felt less desperate, less reactive. Wattles wrote that the creative mind doesn't rush, doesn't fear, and doesn't compete. And for the first time in years, he felt a small taste of that stillness. It wasn't constant, but it was real. Then came the first test. He received a message one afternoon that triggered him instantly, a friend celebrating a big financial breakthrough. Normally, this would have spiraled him into self-comparison, jealousy, and shame. But this time, he paused. He took a breath, and he chose to practice the feeling of creative certainty instead of competitive fear. He reminded himself, In a universe governed by an infinite source, another person's success is not a threat. It is proof, evidence, a sign of what is possible for him too. And something incredible happened. He felt happy for his friend, genuinely, effortlessly, without forcing it. It wasn't enlightenment, but it was evidence that he was changing. That night he sat again with the book, tracing the lines with his fingers, as if the pages themselves carried some forgotten magic. One sentence stopped him. By thought, you create the thing. By action, you cause it to come to you. He read it again and again. He realized he had been trying to skip the emotional part and jump straight to action. He had been hustling from a place of fear instead of acting from certainty. He had been trying to fix his life instead of create it. For the first time, he saw what Wattles meant by efficient action. It wasn't about doing more. It wasn't about working harder. It wasn't about grinding endlessly. Efficient action meant doing every small task with a calm, confident, creative mindset. Not because action produces the result, but because aligned action magnetizes opportunities that anxious action repels. So, he changed his approach. He got up earlier, not out of panic, but out of purpose. He did simple tasks with presence. He stopped rushing. He stopped multitasking. He focused on doing one thing at a time, fully. And the more he acted from this calm identity, the more the numbness in his chest softened. That week, something unexpected happened. He woke up one morning and felt a strange warmth in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. Not excitement, not joy, something deeper. It felt like alignment, like standing in the same frequency as the life he wanted, like the feeling knew him even before he learned how to reach it intentionally. He sat on the edge of his bed, breathing slowly, noticing the sensation as if it were a rare animal he didn't want to scare away. It wasn't forced. It wasn't fake. It wasn't scripted by affirmations. It just appeared. And for the first time in his entire life, he felt the beginning of what Wattles meant by feeling as if it is done. He whispered the words that started this entire journey. Teach me how to feel it. But this time, the words didn't come from desperation. They came from understanding. They came from truth. They came from alignment. That day, he walked differently. He moved differently. His energy felt different, even if physically nothing had changed yet. But the biggest change was this: he stopped chasing signs and started becoming the sign. A few small things began happening. People responded to him with more openness. A co-worker randomly offered him a small project that paid extra. Someone he hadn't spoken to in years sent him a message that seemed perfectly timed. Synchronous moments, little ones but impossible to ignore, began forming a trail. And with every small sign, the feeling grew stronger. It wasn't intensity, it wasn't overwhelming, it wasn't euphoric. It was a quiet certainty, the kind Wattles described as the natural emotional state of the creative mind. By the end of the week, something astonishing happened, something he could never have accessed before. He sat down to visualize, just as he had done countless times before. But this time, when he pictured the future he desired, the emotion didn't feel separate from him. The image didn't feel distant or unreachable. Instead, it felt familiar, like remembering something instead of imagining it, like stepping into a place he had already visited. He opened his eyes and felt tears welling up, not from sadness, but from recognition. He could finally feel it, not the fantasy, not the desire, not the longing, but the identity. For the first time, he wasn't pretending, he wasn't forcing, he wasn't begging, he wasn't faking abundance. He was embodying it. He finally understood what Wattles meant. You must become the thing mentally before you can receive it physically. And that was the moment when everything began accelerating. From that day on, his entire inner world rearranged itself in ways he never imagined possible. Not instantly, not perfectly, but undeniably. The emotional numbness that once felt like cement around his heart had started to melt. And although the fear still whispered sometimes, its voice no longer controlled him. His identity was evolving. He was no longer someone who hoped his future might change. He was becoming the person who knew his future was already written in the invisible. But every transformation meets a final test. His test came on a Friday afternoon. A bill he wasn't expecting arrived, an amount he couldn't cover immediately. The kind of situation that once would have thrown him into panic, anxiety, or self-blame. The kind of moment that used to make his entire emotional world collapse into scarcity. His chest tightened, his breath quickened, the old fear tried to awaken, and for a brief moment the numbness threatened to return. But then something happened, something small, yet monumental. He paused, he remembered, he breathed. He shifted into the identity he had been practicing for weeks. He whispered to himself, "The source is unlimited. The solution already exists." He didn't say it to convince himself. He said it because it felt true. And then something astonishing happened. He felt calm. A calm so profound that he almost didn't recognize himself. Instead of spiraling into fear, he entered the creative mind automatically, effortlessly. His body remembered, his emotions remembered, his identity remembered. For the first time in his life, he understood what Wallace D. Wattles meant when he said, "Do not worry." If you worry, you disconnect yourself from the source. He wasn't disconnected, he wasn't afraid, he wasn't lost, he was aligned. That night, while sitting in bed, he closed his eyes and did something incredibly simple. He visualized himself as someone whose financial life was stable, abundant, organized, and constantly improving. Not with force, not with strain, not with fantasy. He visualized from the inside out, from identity, from certainty. He didn't try to see abundance. He tried to be the person who naturally attracted it, and the feeling came on its own: warmth, calm, stability, a deep knowing, like the emotional equivalent of gravity. He felt rich, not in terms of numbers, but in terms of identity. And in that moment, he realized a truth that would redefine his entire life. Feeling is not emotion. Feeling is identity. Feeling is alignment. Feeling is the emotional signature of the future you are creating. The next morning, everything changed. A message arrived from someone who owed him money from months ago. Unexpected, unprovoked, perfectly timed. The amount they were finally paying back was almost the exact value of the bill he received. It wasn't magic. It wasn't coincidence. It was alignment. It was the first physical confirmation that his internal shift had begun rewriting the external world. But the real change wasn't the money. The real change was who he had become to receive it. Over the next few days, synchronicities multiplied. Little opportunities appeared. A small promotion at work was hinted at. A person he admired reached out unexpectedly. Random ideas for side income came to him with clarity. Everything began to move. Not because he forced it, but because he felt it. His energy was no longer a plea. It was a command, not a demand to the universe, but a declaration of identity. He finally understood what Wattles meant by living in the certain way, not hopeful. Not desperate, not wishful, certain, aligned, creative. One evening, as he sat quietly with the book on his lap, he ran his fingers over the cover and whispered, "Thank you." And for the first time ever, The gratitude wasn't forced. It was real. It came from a place so deep inside him that it felt like a second heartbeat. He realized something powerful. Gratitude is not the reaction to what you receive. Gratitude is the vibration that brings it to you. Gratitude is the bridge between identity and reality. That night, he felt something he had spent his entire life chasing, the feeling. Not imagining abundance, not performing abundance, not hoping for abundance, but being abundance. And when he finally reached that state, something inside him broke open, not in pain, but in liberation. Tears rolled down his face, soft and silent, not because he was sad, but because he had finally come home to himself, home to the identity he was meant to embody, home to the creative mind that had been waiting for years. He whispered, barely audible, "I finally feel it," and this time the universe didn't feel distant. It felt aligned, connected, responsive, as if it had been waiting for him to arrive. From that night onward, his life changed in a way that can only be described as inevitable, not because of luck, not because of chance, but because he had learned the greatest secret, the one hidden beneath every law of manifestation, every spiritual teaching, every metaphysical text. You do not manifest what you want. You manifest what you can feel. And now he could feel it, fully, clearly, effortlessly, consistently. He became the person he once begged the universe to let him become, and the universe responded exactly as Wattles promised it would. The journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. Because once you learn how to feel it, you become impossible to stop, and now it is your turn. If you're listening to this right now, it isn't an accident. This message found you because something inside you is ready to awaken, ready to shift, ready to feel, not with force, not with fantasy, but with alignment. So breathe, calm your mind, enter the creative world, feel the identity of the future that already belongs to you, and walk in that certainty every single day. Because when you learn how to feel it, everything changes, not someday, not eventually, but immediately, inside you first, and then everywhere else. You're not here to chase your future, you're here to become it, and you will. Thank you for watching. If this message touched something deep inside you, take a moment to share your experience in the comments. And if you'd like to support this channel and help us create more content like this, you can buy me a coffee through the link in the description. It truly helps. And don't forget to subscribe. Your journey is only beginning, and there is so much more for us to explore together.